Hello and welcome back to Born to Rant. I'm Brandon, and this week we are here to talk about an adventure movie that deserves to be held in the same regard as Raiders of the Lost Ark. One of the only family-friendly movies in John Carpenter's entire filmography, and the movie that made Carpenter give up on the studio system. That's right, this week we are talking about how John Carpenter's Big Trouble in Little China came to be, everything that makes it awesome, and its legacy almost 40 years later. And a big thank you to my supporters over on Patreon who voted for me to cover this movie. My personal history with Big Trouble comes a little bit later than I'm sure most of my audiences. I was like 19 or 20 the first time I saw this movie. I completely missed it as a kid. But the thing I find interesting about Big Trouble in Little China is that the storytelling remains incredibly effective, no matter your age. And as part of John Carpenter's filmography, Big Trouble in Little China really lands at an interesting place. This would be his last film inside the studio system for the remainder of the 1980s, his last film with Dean Cundey as director of photography, and the last time he would work with Kurt Russell on a new character. The two would work together again on 1996's Escape from LA, which was actually the first John Carpenter movie I ever saw. Big Trouble in Little China is just a movie that undeniably sticks with you, from the over-the-top one-liners to the fight choreography and wire work to these amazing practical sets created by John J. Lloyd. It all makes this a completely unique and engaging movie. But before we get too deep into talking about everything we love about Big Trouble in Little China, let's go back in time just a bit and talk about how this movie came to be. The origins of Big Trouble in Little China stretch all the way back to the early 1980s and begins with these two guys, Gary Goldman and David Z. Weinstein, and their original script entitled Lotus. And their original idea for the movie came from their love of martial arts movies like The Butterfly Murders, their fascination with the real story of the Tong Wars in 19th century San Francisco, and of course their love of westerns. And Lotus is a script that actually takes place in the 1880s, not the 1980s, and it follows a cowboy named Wiley Prescott who accompanies his friend's son to meet his fiancée, Lotus, who's quickly kidnapped by the sorcerer Lo Pan. So really not that dissimilar from the premise of the movie we got, but just set in a completely different time. And in 1982, the two writers submitted their script to producer Paul Monish, who was able to get 20th Century Fox to option it. Then the movie was more or less fast-tracked with the name change to Big Trouble in Little China. Once the movie was officially at Fox, they brought on Oscar-nominated writer W.D. Richter to rewrite the script. And Richter was actually coming in hot off the failure of writing and directing The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension, which I actually just saw for the first time a few months ago, and wow, the influence of that movie on Big Trouble in Little China is very obvious once you know this through line. And even though Buckaroo Banzai was a big flop, they still really liked and trusted Richter, so he was actually offered the chance to direct Big Trouble, but he decided to pass and suggested his friend John Carpenter instead. At this point in his career, Carpenter was in an interesting spot. He'd already overcome the failure of The Thing in 1982. How crazy is it that The Thing flopped, by the way? But after the failure of The Thing, Carpenter immediately bounced back with the crowd pleaser Christine, followed by Starman, which earned Jeff Bridges an Oscar nomination. So at this point, he's feeling good about his career, but he also knows that all it takes is one flop for the studios not to take you seriously anymore. When Carpenter read Richter's draft of the script, he was so intrigued by the fact that it was, and this is a direct quote from John Carpenter, an action-adventure, comedy-mystery, ghost story monster movie, and he really liked that, so he signed on to direct. He did a quick rewrite of the script to tighten things up, something Carpenter was always really good at, in my opinion. And one of the big things that we have to talk about with the production of Big Trouble in Little China is the fact that at the exact same time, Paramount was developing The Golden Child, which was a similar action-adventure comedy that was supposed to be the next Indiana Jones, and that movie also involved an everyman getting sucked into a world centered around Chinese mysticism. And the real reason that Fox was concerned about The Golden Child was that Eddie Murphy was set to star in the movie, and at this point in his career, it felt like Murphy could do absolutely no wrong. You know, I've actually never seen The Golden Child, but if you all want me to watch it and do a video on it, let me know in the comments. So with Paramount developing such a similar movie, Big Trouble in Little China was put on the fast track. As far as casting goes, it sounds like originally the studio was wanting their own big star to lead the movie, like a Jack Nicholson or a Clint Eastwood, both of whom turned the movie down. However, because of Carpenter's pre-existing pre-existing relationship with Kurt Russell and Russell's rising star at the time, Fox was happy to have him come aboard as Jack Burton. Kim Cattrall was cast because of her experience in both dramatic and comedic roles, and on her part, she really liked that the movie struck a balance and that she wouldn't be a damsel in distress throughout the movie. As for the role of Wang Chi, Dennis Dun was the very last role cast for the movie, and he wasn't cast until just a few days before shooting began. And he was cast off the strength of his experience working on Year of the Dragon, which had come out earlier that year in 1985. And Dennis Dun was really attracted to the movie because of its mix of martial arts and comedy, and the fact that much like Wang Chi, he's also a second-generation American, and he liked that Wang really embodies that mix of understanding your parents' ancestry and culture, but also being fully adapted to being an American. But we can't forget about our villain, Lo Pan, played flawlessly by James Hong, who at this point had already been acting for 30 plus years across movie and TV. Apparently, he came in and just immediately nailed his audition, which I think makes a lot of sense because I truly don't think there's anyone else on this planet that could do Lo Pan justice the way that James Hong was able to. As for the filming of Big Trouble in Little China, it did shoot on location in San Francisco's Chinatown district for all of the exterior establishing shots. However, most of the movie was filmed on Fox's studio in Los Angeles. It sounds like production went relatively smooth, although I did read a story that Carpenter went off on a special effects coordinator for mistiming a squib, and Kurt Russell said it's one of the only times he ever saw Carpenter lose his cool. And Dennis Dun made it a point to practice martial arts, choreography, and swordsmanship with his stuntman Jeff Imade and the rest of the stunt team in between takes every single day while on set. Overall, it does sound like the production was rushed, but there were no big issues on set, and for the most part, it seems like everyone involved enjoyed working on the movie and has fond memories of their time spent on it. So one of the more interesting things I found while doing research for this video is that the test screenings for Big Trouble in Little China were through the roof. Apparently, all of the test audiences ate it up and had a blast with it, which left both John Carpenter and Kurt Russell feeling very confident that they had a hit on their hands. Russell's even talked about how when doing press for the movie, interviewers would ask him things like, "What's it feel like to be in the biggest movie of the summer?" And he'd try and play it cool in his answers and say things like, "Oh, we'll just have to wait and see." And as the movie began to roll out, Carpenter and Russell noticed they weren't really seeing much promotion for the movie, and the promotion they were seeing was not quite capturing the tone or spirit of the movie. So when Big Trouble in Little China was released onto 1,000 screens over July 4th weekend of 1986, it made just $2.7 million against its $25 million budget, and it placed 12th at the box office. And I think that the underwhelming advertising campaign is only partially responsible for the failure of Big Trouble at the box office. It didn't help that critics didn't understand the movie either. They all seemed to think that the film was bogged down by special effects and that the characters weren't fleshed out enough. Basically, the same thing that they always complained about with every single movie John Carpenter ever made. Carpenter and Russell have also pointed to the fact that Big Trouble was released just a few weeks before James Cameron's Aliens, and the hype surrounding that movie was just completely unbeatable. And unfortunately, Big Trouble in Little China went on to make only $11.1 million worldwide, making it an objective failure, which crushed Carpenter enough that he swore off the studio system altogether, deciding to focus on smaller, independent movies instead. And with all of that out of the way, I think it's time that we jump into the movie itself and talk about all of the things that have made it stick with us for all this time. Big Trouble in Little China opens with Victor Wong's Egg Shen meeting with an attorney to talk about the events of the film. And I don't have much to say about this other than the fact that it was a studio mandated addition to make it more clear that Jack Burton is the hero of the movie, even though he really isn't, but more on that in a bit. The proper beginning of the movie introduces us to Kurt Russell's Jack Burton, who's just casually throwing out some all-time great one-liners here.
Sir, the check is in the mail.
But we're also introduced to Carpenter and Alan Howarth's excellent score. And Howarth and Carpenter were no strangers to working together. Howarth actually did the music for Escape from New York, Halloween 2, Halloween 3, which is the only good Halloween sequel, by the way, and they did the music together for Christine as well. And the score for this movie is just iconic. Even just talking about it gets this main riff stuck in my head. I'm actually gonna go see John Carpenter play live in October, and I can't even begin to tell you guys how excited I am to hear this song in particular. Also, this movie just feels like a warm blanket to me because we've got that classic classic John Carpenter widescreen aspect ratio, and his use of Albertus font for his credits just always makes me feel happy. Okay, so our first real scene with Jack Burton is with him and Wang Chi gambling with a large group of people in the rain, and quickly Jack wins a good amount of money from Wang, and when Wang says he has to leave to go to the airport, well, Jack just decides to tag along. The next several minutes of the movie are filled with some of the most well-written exposition in any John Carpenter movie. We learn about Wang Chi's fiance, Mao Yin, who has green eyes. We meet Gracie Law. We're introduced to the Lords of Death, and all in the course of like less than 10 minutes. Once the Lords of Death capture Mao Yin, we get this fun little chase through the airport garage, and actually these two shots of the Lords of Death and Mao Yin in the trunk are two of the images from this movie that stick with me the most. They just feel so cool and 80s, but it's actually just a simple mounted camera rigged to a moving car, which is one of the things I love about Dean Cundey's cinematography. Even when he's not being flashy or technical, his shots just still work and look cool. And if you don't know who Dean Cundey is, he's the guy that shot some of your favorite movies like Halloween, The Thing, Back to the Future, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Hook, Jurassic Park, and we can't forget seriously though, Dean Cundey did shoot Camp Rock. Once Jack and Wang arrive back in Chinatown, we get our first glimpses of Lo Pan and the legendary battle between the Chang Sing and the Wing Kong gangs, and this is just a fun action sequence. Plus it introduces us to the three storms, thunder, rain, and lightning, who are all terrifying in their own right. Plus, scary Lo Pan makes his first appearance with Jack trying to run him over only to get out and be temporarily blinded by him. Wang splashing dirty water in Jack's eyes to help him see is so funny to me. Once Jack and Wang make their escape to Wang's restaurant, we learn just a little bit more about the world we're stepping into. Plus, Gracie Law shows up and says one of my favorite lines in the movie,
"Don't panic, it's only me, Gracie Law."
We also meet Donald Lee playing Eddie Lee, and here we learn all about the warring societies, some of the lore of Lo Pan, what happened to Mao Yin, and our heroes make a plan on how to get her back from the White Tiger where she's supposedly being held. So Jack is sent in undercover to try and rescue Mao Yin, and while he waits, Lo Pan sends in the three storms to quite literally tear the roof off the building and capture Mao Yin. So with Mao Yin captured by Lo Pan, our heroes reconvene, and we officially meet Kate Burton's Margot Litzenberger and get some really silly back and forth between her and Gracie Law explaining who David Lo Pan is and how reclusive he is. We also get a fun back and forth between Gracie and Wang as they describe Lo Pan's impenetrable fortress where Mao Yin is being held. But Wang, being a true hero, says he's going in anyway, and he brings Jack along with him because, as we all know, Jack Burton isn't actually the hero of Big Trouble in Little China. He's the bumbling sidekick. Wang is our real hero. He's the one that ends up with the girl at the end after all. Disguised as telephone repairmen, Wang and Jack make their way inside the building trying to find secret passageways to find Mao Yin, but the two are quickly discovered and are almost drowned in the hell of upside down sinners. Absolutely badass name and concept, by the way. Once they escape, they're then quickly captured and tortured by the three storms and then taken to meet our third iteration of David Lo Pan, an old decrepit man in a wheelchair. And like a good villain in any adventure story, James Hong delivers an excellent monologue explaining his backstory and why he needs Mao Yin, and specifically a Chinese girl with green eyes. He needs to marry and sacrifice the girl to break the curse of incorporeality that he's been stuck with for over 2,000 years. Basically, my guy doesn't really exist in any solid form. Anytime we see him, it's more of an illusion than a physical being. At the same time, Grace, Eddie, and Margot have entered the building, and the three are led to an elevator that's quickly pumped with gas, and all three are knocked out. Thankfully, Jack manages to knock himself over and cut him and Wang from their wheelchairs, and the two quickly make a plan to get the drop on Thunder, who's carrying Eddie's body. And it always makes me laugh how Kurt Russell yells, "Blindfolds!" just before Thunder comes in the room. So now that Wang, Jack, and Eddie are free, they go to break Gracie and Margot out. And fun fact, the reason that Kim Cattrall is hogtied here is because in a deleted scene, Gracie wouldn't stop getting mouthy with the guard, so they hogtie her as punishment. And I love that Margot is still working on her article while laying in her cot. So while Wang fights off all the guards pretty much by himself, I mean, I guess Eddie helps too, Jack goes in and frees all of the women being held. And I love this silly belly flop dive thing that Gracie does as everyone is making making their escape. There's also this iconic moment of Jack opening the door, which leads to another fight scene with Wang kicking ass. I mean, Jack does shoot some people, but then he spends the rest of the fight trying to find his knife, which is objectively hilarious. And once all the guards are taken out, the group goes to make their escape to Egg Shen's bus, and everyone but Gracie, who's unfortunately kidnapped by a Yeren, make it out alive. Once Gracie is chained up, Lo Pan comes in and realizes that she has green eyes as well, and makes a plan to marry both her and Mao Yin and then sacrifice only Gracie. And once they put Gracie in the room with Mao Yin, we see that she's unconscious and floating in the air. Honestly, if I would have seen this movie as a kid, I feel like this image would have gotten under my skin the same way that Sigourney Weaver floating in Ghostbusters did, as would this image of Lo Pan's glowing, creepy face. Meanwhile, our heroes regroup, and this group making their way through the caverns and into Lo Pan's palace are some of the best looking moments of the movie. This is one of those perfect examples of when everyone working on a movie is just at the top of their game. Dean Cundey makes John Lloyd's sets just look absolutely stunning, and Carpenter and the actors are giving us that special blend of excitement and terror that only a good adventure movie should give you. Plus, we get lots of Carpenter weirdness like the entire wedding ceremony, these cool armored guards, and of course the flying eye guardian is cool and creepy as hell too. And we can't leave out Egg Shen's potion either. First of all, the image of Egg behind the bar pouring the dry ice into the little glasses is funny, but not nearly as funny as everyone's reaction to the potion in the elevator.
I feel kind of invincible.
Me too. I got a very positive attitude about this.
Now, the final battle is my favorite set piece of the entire movie. It might even be my favorite set piece in any John Carpenter movie. It's right up there with the church basement housing the anti-god in a vat of swirling green goo in Prince of Darkness. But seriously, not only is the set design of this movie super cool, but the way it's lit with neon just makes this feel entirely unique. And the final battle itself is great. We get Jack knocking himself out with the ceiling and him almost getting crushed after killing this guy. There's also all of this amazing wire and trampoline work going on. Dennis Dunn really gets the chance to show off all of the hard work he was putting in between takes. And the mental fight between Lo Pan and Egg Shen is silly and awesome. Once the main battle is more or less over, Gracie and Jack make their way to escape and kiss, and the lipstick stain on Jack's face was a completely in-the-moment idea that Russell and Carpenter thought would be funny because they'd never seen it done before, and they were right because it's hilarious. And then the final showdown with Lo Pan sees Wang going to fight Thunder while Jack tries to take out Lo Pan, only to fail and hit a gong with his knife instead. But luckily for Jack,
It's all in the reflexes.
and he's able to finally take Lo Pan out. Upon finding Lo Pan dead, Thunder swells with anger and rage and explodes, and this still looks so cool to this day. The movie ends with everyone back at Wang's restaurant, Wang and Mao reunited, Gracie asking Jack to stay, and Jack riding off into the sunset. And I love that the movie ends with a little tease of the Yeren being in the back of Jack's truck. And then, of course, the title track, Big Trouble in Little China, by the Coupe de Villes plays us out. And for those that don't know, the Coupe de Villes is made up of John Carpenter, Tommy Lee Wallace, and Nick Castle. You know what? We need more supergroups made up of directors. So, nearly 40 years later, what is the legacy of Big Trouble in Little China? Well, it's a complete cult classic and one of the most beloved movies in John Carpenter's filmography, which in and of itself is a filmography that has multiple cult classics in it. The legacy of Big Trouble in Little China is honestly very similar to the legacy of John Carpenter. It wasn't appreciated properly upon its release, but over the years through cable showings and video store rentals, it became a movie that people have become obsessed with. And yes, both at the time of its release and in the decades since, it has been surrounded in fake controversy and outrage, but also at this point, it seems like pretty much everyone agrees this movie rocks. Even if they have a problem with the movie's politics, I feel like pretty much everyone can agree this movie is a good time. And in 2018, it was actually announced that The Rock was working on a Big Trouble in Little China remake, but thankfully Disney bought Fox and it seems to be dead, and we haven't heard any news about it for years, so I hope that stays the same. Even though Big Trouble in Little China was a flop upon release and it caused Carpenter to give up on the studio system, he would then go on to make two indie movies with Alive Pictures that happen to be two of my favorite movies in John Carpenter's filmography, They Live and Prince of Darkness. And Prince of Darkness would also see John Carpenter reuniting with both Victor Wong and Dennis Dunn. Also, I had a lot of fun covering this movie. John Carpenter is my favorite director of all time, and I genuinely like to love every movie he's ever made, except for Memoirs of an Invisible Man and Ghosts of Mars, but I do plan on covering every movie in his filmography over the lifetime of this channel. And if you guys ever want a dedicated video on John Carpenter's career, that's something I would love to do as well. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you for watching, and a special thank you to my patrons who produced this video. You all help make these videos possible. If you'd like to be credited as an executive producer or producer, you can find a link to the Patreon in the description below. Patrons get to help me pick which movies to cover on the channel and get access to an exclusive Discord server. Born to Rant is a completely independent channel, and I use absolutely no AI in the making of my videos, so please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We release new videos covering all of your childhood favorites every Thursday at 7 a.m. Pacific time. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.